Title: The Wedding Crashers, a Farm Feud. Imagine waking up to cheerful chatter, clinking glasses, and the distant hum of music, except it's coming from your backyard, and you didn't invite a soul. I stepped onto my porch, rubbing my eyes, only to freeze in absolute disbelief. Rows of white chairs, a fully decorated wedding arch. Over 100 well-dressed strangers littered my farm. I had no idea that a full-blown wedding was happening right on my property. At first, I thought I was dreaming. But then, the unmistakable voice of my nemesis, Karen, the self-appointed queen of our neighborhood HOA, cut through the morning air like nails on a chalkboard. She was barking orders at a group of caterers, standing proudly beside the wedding setup like she owned the place. My stomach dropped. This was the final straw. Karen had made my life miserable for years. Constant complaints about my farm's odor. It's a farm. The audacity to demand I change my barn's color to match the neighborhood aesthetic, and even trying to fine me for keeping chickens. But this, a full-on wedding on my land without my permission, was an entirely new level of insanity. I stormed toward the chaos, dodging a man carrying a massive wedding cake. The moment Karen spotted me, her face shifted from smug satisfaction to feigned innocence. "Oh, you're awake," she chirped as if she were welcoming me to my own home. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, gesturing to the entire venue that had magically appeared overnight. Karen rolled her eyes like I was being unreasonable. "Relax, it's just a wedding. My son and his fiancée needed a rustic venue, and your farm was just sitting here." I blinked. "Just sitting here? Karen, this is my property." She waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. We're neighbors. I figured you wouldn't mind doing something nice for the community." "Nice for the community?" "Karen, you never even asked." My voice was rising, and a few guests were starting to look over. She sighed, placing a hand on her hip. "I left a note in your mailbox last week." No response, so I assumed it was fine. A note. A single note. Not a call. Not a knock on my door. Just a note, as if that gave her the right to throw a wedding on my land. Before I could say another word, a frazzled young woman in a stunning white wedding dress stormed up to us, her veil slightly askew. "Mom, what's going on?" "Who is this?" she hissed at Karen, glancing at me. Karen plastered on a too-sweet smile. "Oh, don't worry, sweetheart. Just a little misunderstanding with the property owner. Everything's fine." The bride turned to me, eyes wide with panic. "You own this place?" "Yes," I said firmly, "and no one asked me if they could use it." Her face paled. "Mom, you said everything was taken care of." Karen let out a forced laugh. "It is. Look, we're already here. The guests have arrived. The food is set. There's no point in arguing now. Let's just enjoy the day." I felt my blood pressure spike. "Absolutely not. Pack it up. This wedding is not happening here." Karen's smile finally dropped, replaced by that steely, condescending glare I had come to despise. "Listen, I've put a lot of effort into this. It's just one day. What's the big deal?" "The big deal is that you're trespassing." At that, the bride nearly fainted. "Trespassing? Mom, did you?" "Don't be ridiculous," Karen scoffed, straightening her blouse. "Everyone does this kind of thing for their neighbors. You're just being difficult." Guests were now fully tuning into the argument, whispers rippling through the crowd. The groom finally appeared, confusion written all over his face. Is something wrong?" "Yes," I said. "Your wedding venue is stolen property." The groom turned to Karen in disbelief. "Mom, you said this was all arranged." "It is arranged," Karen snapped, then turned back to me, lowering her voice. "Listen, I have some very important people here. People who could make life difficult for you. Do yourself a favor, don't ruin my son's wedding." So that's how she wanted to play it. A slow, smug smile spread across my face. "You're right, Karen. It would be such a shame if this beautiful wedding got ruined." She narrowed her eyes. "Exactly. So be reasonable." "I am," I interrupted, my grin widening. "Which is why I think we should embrace the full farm experience. If you're going to use my property, you should really see what life on a farm is like." Karen frowned, clearly sensing something was off. But before she could argue, I turned on my heel and strolled toward the barn. She had no idea what was coming. Karen had no idea what she had just unleashed. If she wanted to steal my land for a wedding venue, then she was about to experience farm life in all its unpredictable, chaotic glory. I reached the barn and yanked open the doors. Inside, my farmhand, Jake leaned against a bale of hay, arms crossed, having watched the whole fiasco unfold from a distance. His smirk told me he knew exactly what I was about to do. "You want me to let him out?" he asked, already moving toward the pens. I grinned. "Let him all out." Jake let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "This is gonna be fun." With practiced ease, he unlatched the gates one by one. First, the chickens, dozens of them, flapping and squawking as they rushed outside, scattering across the pristine wedding setup. One particularly bold hen flapped onto the buffet table, pecking at the beautifully arranged fruit platter. The first shriek of horror came from a guest who had not anticipated a feathery invasion. Next came the goats, three mischievous troublemakers who immediately bolted toward the floral arrangements, chomping on expensive white roses like they were an afternoon snack. A bridesmaid in heels screamed as one of them tried to nibble at the lace hem of her dress. Then came the pigs. Daisy, my biggest and most enthusiastic sow, trotted out like she owned the place. Her little piglets followed, their tiny hooves clattering against the wooden deck set up for the dance floor. One of them found its way under a table, tipping it over and sending a bottle of champagne crashing to the ground. Karen's voice was the first to cut through the chaos. "What are you doing?" I strolled back toward her, watching the absolute disaster unfold. The flower girl was crying, the caterers were trying to shoo chickens away from the food, and one of the groomsmen was being aggressively pursued by a particularly territorial goose. I folded my arms. "Oh, just making sure my farm continues to run as usual. You know, since I wasn't consulted about turning it into a wedding venue." Karen's face was redder than the apples in my orchard. "You're ruining my son's wedding." I raised an eyebrow. "Am I?" Because I could have sworn it was you who ruined it by illegally setting up shop on private property. The bride, who had been attempting to salvage the situation, suddenly turned to her mother, her expression shifting from panic to pure fury. "Mom," she hissed, "did you even ask before setting this up?" Karen's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The bride's eyes widened in horror. "Oh my God, you lied." Again. The groom, who had been silently watching the disaster unfold, let out a slow breath and rubbed his temples. "Mom, this is insane." Karen let out an exasperated huff. "Why is everyone acting like this is a big deal? We're already here. The wedding is happening." But just as the words left her mouth, a new scream echoed through the air. I turned just in time to see Daisy, my 300-pound pig, launch herself at the wedding cake table. It wobbled. It shook. Then, in one slow motion, cinematic masterpiece of destruction, the entire three-tiered cake came crashing down. Silence. Then chaos. The bride let out an ear-piercing shriek. My cake. Daisy, unfazed, stuck her snout into the frosting and began happily munching away. Karen was shaking, her hands curled into fists. You. But before she could finish, one of the pigs snorted and, without warning, headbutted her right in the stomach. She stumbled backward, arms flailing, and with a spectacular splat, landed straight in a fresh pile of mud. The guests gasped. A few covered their mouths in shock. And then, someone started laughing. The bride, still clutching the remains of her ruined gown, looked at her mother, covered in mud and pig slobber, and something inside her snapped. She burst out laughing. The groom followed, shaking his head in disbelief, but unable to stop himself from chuckling. A few guests hesitantly joined in, and within seconds, half the wedding party was wheezing with uncontrollable laughter. Karen, still sitting in filth, trembled with rage. "This is not funny." I crouched beside her, giving her my best Karen-level fake sympathy look. "Oh, Karen, you should really be more careful where you step. This is a farm, after all." Her eyes narrowed to slits. "You will pay for this." I grinned. "Oh, Karen, sweetheart. I think you already did." She let out a strangled noise of frustration, but before she could say another word, one of the pigs let out a loud, wet, very unfortunate fart. The crowd lost it. Guests were doubled over, some wiping away tears of laughter, others filming the entire disaster unfolding. A bridesmaid had completely given up and was just sitting on the grass, shaking her head in disbelief. Karen, now completely humiliated, pushed herself up and turned toward her son, desperate for some form of support. "Sweetheart," she gasped, "tell me you still want to get married today." The groom sighed, rubbing his face before looking at his fiancée. "Do you?" he asked her softly. The bride, staring at the wreckage of her wedding, let out a slow exhale. Then, she shook her head. "No, not like this. Not with her." Karen let out an inhuman screech. "No." The groom turned back to his mother, and with more resolve than I expected, said, "Mom, I think you just ruined the wedding yourself." Karen's entire body went stiff. "You don't mean that." The bride stepped beside him, nodding. "He does. And so do I." The guests began murmuring, some of them slowly making their way toward the exit, realizing that the show was officially over. Karen turned to me, her face twisted with pure hatred. "You planned this. You set me up." I smirked. "Oh, Karen, you did that all by yourself." And just like that, the most disastrous wedding in history officially came to an end. Karen wasn't the type to take humiliation lightly. As the last of the guests awkwardly shuffled away from the wedding wreckage, she remained frozen in place, covered in mud, frosting, and the last remnants of what had once been her perfect event. Then, as if someone had flipped a switch, she turned on me. "You will pay for this," she screeched, pointing a shaking, manicured finger in my direction. "This isn't over. I will sue you for everything you have." I sighed, already bored. "Karen, you threw a wedding on private property without permission. If anyone is getting sued, it's you." She opened her mouth, no doubt ready to unleash another threat, but the bride suddenly stepped between us. "Enough, Mom," she snapped, her once pristine dress now ruined beyond repair. "I have had it with your games, your lies, and your controlling behavior. This was supposed to be MY Day, and you turned it into a disaster." Karen's face paled. "Sweetheart, I was only trying to." "No, Mom," the groom cut in, shaking his head in disappointment. "You didn't do this for us. You did this for yourself. You didn't care what we wanted. You just wanted control." Karen's jaw worked as she searched for something, anything, to say that would make her the victim. But for once, she had no one left to manipulate. The bride turned to me, exhaling sharply. "I am so sorry for everything my mother did. I swear, I had no idea." I nodded, crossing my arms. "It's not your fault, but it is her problem now." Karen let out a frustrated noise, standing up abruptly. This isn't fair." The bride ignored her, turning back to the groom. "I think we need to take a break." His eyes widened. "Wait, what?" She gestured around them, the absolute catastrophe of a wedding. This whole thing made me realize something. We never made a single decision for ourselves. It was always about what my mom wanted. And if we don't take a step back and figure out if we actually want this, then we're making a huge mistake. Karen gasped in horror. "You can't be serious." The groom hesitated, then slowly nodded. "I think you might be right." Karen looked like she had been slapped. "You're throwing your engagement away because of this man?" she spat, gesturing at me like I was a supervillain who had masterminded the entire event just to ruin her life. I smirked. "Don't give me too much credit, Karen. You did this all on your own." The bride took off her veil and tossed it to the ground before turning to her mother one last time. "Goodbye, Mom." With that, she turned and walked toward the road. After a brief hesitation, the groom followed. Karen shrieked after them, but they didn't look back. The remaining guests, those who hadn't already snuck away, stood in stunned silence. Then, as if the universe had a sense of humor, one of the pigs let out a loud, obnoxious snort before flopping over happily in the mud. The moment was perfect. I took a slow breath and turned to Karen. "Well, Karen, I'd say this wedding was one for the books." She let out a strangled noise, fists clenched at her sides, before spinning on her heel and stomping toward her car. Her once pristine beige dress was stained with dirt, frosting, and whatever else the farm had gifted her with that day. As she reached her car, a camera shutter clicked behind her. One of the guests, still holding their phone up, grinned. "Oh, Karen, I think you just went viral." Karen's head snapped toward them, her face frozen in horror. Then, as realization set in, she let out one final, agonized scream before peeling out of the driveway, leaving behind nothing but tire marks and the lingering stench of her ultimate downfall. The second she was gone, the remaining guests erupted into laughter. Jake, who had been watching the chaos unfold with great amusement, walked up beside me, arms crossed. "That was better than any reality show I've ever seen." I exhaled, a slow, satisfied grin spreading across my face. "Yeah, That was legendary. The dust had barely settled from Karen's dramatic exit when my phone buzzed. I pulled it out, expecting a message from one of my farm suppliers or maybe an update from Jake about the cleanup efforts. Instead, I saw an unfamiliar number with a link attached. Trending, the most entitled wedding disaster you'll ever see. Oh no. Curious and a little excited, I clicked on the link. The video had already racked up thousands of views. It opened with Karen, mid-tantrum, flailing her arms as she screamed at her son and his bride. The camera panned to the ruined wedding setup, the pigs feasting on the remains of the cake, and Karen's final, humiliating fall into the mud. Then came the slow-motion replay. I nearly choked on my laughter. Someone had added dramatic music to the moment Karen tumbled backward, her face frozen in shock as she crashed into the muck. The comment section was a war zone of amusement. I've never seen karma act so fast in my life. That pig at the end deserves an Oscar. Whoever owns this farm is my hero. Jake peeked over my shoulder. Oh man, this is gold. I shook my head, smirking. Karen's going to lose her mind. And she did. Within hours, the video had made its way to local news stations. People in town were sharing it left and right, and soon, I started getting texts from friends and neighbors. I always knew she was bad, but this? Iconic. Tell me you're selling Karen got kicked off my farm t-shirts. You should have charged for admission. Karen, of course, was having the opposite reaction. She tried to report the video, claiming it was defamation. When that didn't work, she went on a Facebook rampage, posting long-winded rants about how she had been set up and that she was the real victim here. The internet didn't buy it. Someone dug up old HOA complaints she had filed against nearly every house in the neighborhood. Another user found footage of her yelling at a grocery store employee over a coupon dispute. The town had known Karen was bad, but now the world knew it too. Then came the petitions. A group of locals started one titled, "Remove Karen from the HOA." It hit 500 signatures in less than a day. Karen, now realizing her social standing was crumbling, switched tactics. Instead of rage, she played the victim card. She went on a local radio show, her voice quivering as she claimed she was just trying to give her son the perfect wedding. The radio host wasn't buying it. "Karen," he interrupted, "did you or did you not trespass on private property and throw a wedding without permission?" Silence. Then, a quiet. "Well, when you put it like that." The clip of her awkward hesitation spread just as fast as the original video. It was over for her. By the end of the week, Karen resigned from the HOA, citing stress and cyberbullying. The neighborhood threw an unofficial celebration, with Jake setting up a projector to replay the wedding disaster video on the side of my barn. Popcorn was served. People cheered at the pig's grand finale. As for the bride and groom, they sent me a message a few days later. "Bride, I know my mother caused a disaster, but I wanted to thank you for standing your ground. It made us realize how toxic she was. We're doing much better now. Also, if you ever want to rent out the farm, with permission this time, let me know." Smiley face. Me. I'll think about it. But only if the pigs get invited. Bride. Deal.